Okay, we are now recording and back to PowerPoint and our first slide. Okay, so here we go. So the title of this class is Mamzers and Mashiach, Illicit Sexual Encounters in the Bible. And I'll talk in a minute about what I mean by Mamzers and Mashiach. By the way, this is small enough so that you can just chime in if you have a question. I can't always see all of you, I'm happy to say, because there are enough of you that it's a little hard. But there is actually a way you can raise your hand, but maybe not when we're, I don't know, actually. If you click on the participants thing, you can raise a virtual hand. But just chime in. There's not so many of us. Okay, here we go. So one of the things I always point out at the beginning is I have a website. Some of you have seen it. This is what it looks like when you first get there. And now I actually have a yellow block making it easy for people to check into these classes. But there's a menu, and one of the choices is classes. And under that, one of the choices is lectures and classes. And I have copies of the slides and copies of the texts if you would like them. So the overview is, what we're going to be doing is carefully reading some of the most interesting parts of the Bible. And because of their sexual nature, I'm just adjusting things here. Because of their sexual nature, they are stories you may not have studied before. So, and then we'll address the question of the meaning of them collectively, because the way they are in the Bible, as you know, the Bible is sort of randomly scattered stories. Depending on what you believe about the authorship of the Bible, you know, you can argue and believe that there's one author and everything is really connected. But there are stories in the Bible that clearly contradict each other. That actually might be an interesting discussion in itself. But then we have these rather strange stories, and the interpretation really is mine. So let's keep going. Actually, I see a person I spy with my little eye saying somebody iPhone. Is that Jill? It looks like you set it down. You set the thing down. Okay.
No, I've turned it.
Okay.
I've turned it. Oh no.
Oh yeah, no, that's you. Okay. I just wanted to make, okay. So there is a book which actually has many of these stories and a deep interpretation of them individually. And the book is called The Harlot by the Side of the Road, Forbidden Tales of the Bible by Jonathan Kirsch. Jonathan Kirsch is also the book critic of the Los Angeles Times. It's a wonderful book, and it's an in-depth discussion of these stories and a lot more. So I call the talk Mamzers and Mashiach. Most of us who grew up in Jewish households have heard the word mamzer, and usually think it's not a nice word, and it's usually thought to mean bastard. In Judaism, a mamzer is an illegitimate child, but that is to say, very specifically, the offspring of a forbidden relationship, such as adultery or incest or something, not a child born out of wedlock. A child born of two people, both Jews, one not Jew, maybe a Jew, may not be a Jew, but unless there's adultery or incest or something like that going on, they would not be considered a mamzer. The issue of mamzerut, which is the status of being a mamzer, is a very serious one in Orthodox Jewish law, because a mamzer can only marry another mamzer, cannot marry a kosher Jew. So, for example, let's say a couple has, you have an adulterous union of a couple, and it produces a baby. That baby, if the rabbi, knows that the baby is a mamzer, that baby cannot marry anyone other than another mamzer, and there's no solution for it. So it's a horrible thing. I'm happy to report to you that in Reform Judaism, most of you know that I'm a Reform rabbi, that the issue is not an issue. So, Skona. And is that your name, Skona? First name, last name?
It's my whole name, Scott. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
first name, Skana.
Skona, sorry.
So for children who are born out of wedlock, is there any similar rule? They're not included
No,
in this
no.
category?
No, child born out of wedlock, there is no
So they're
negative
allowed to
status.
marry-
Sorry, say again?
No negative status.
Right.
Okay,
So
I was just asking if there was any negative status. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you know, there may be public shaming and so on, but in terms of their status in Jewish law, it is
Law.
completely without an issue.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a mamzer, and Mashiach is is just the Hebrew word for Messiah, and it's of course the issue of Messiah is a lot more complicated, and so now we're going to have a digression.
Rabbi Michael.
Yes.
Yes. What about a child born from a slave or a servant?
Since there aren't slaves or servants around, even in biblical times, that person would not be a mamzer. I'm not even sure the issue of mamzerut comes up in biblical times, but
Okay.
yeah, but,
Okay.
but there's no issue. There's a big issue, which we're not going to get into, about who is a Jew. And traditionally in Judaism, that is a child born to a Jewish mother. As in many other cases, the father doesn't matter at all. So that's, but whether the person's a slave or free is not an issue. Who owns the child may be an issue under biblical law, and I'm not expert on that because no one's been seriously worrying about that question for 2,000 years. Okay.
I'm sorry, my only relationship then is from Bible. So
Okay.
Okay.
So the issue of Messiah is a interesting and complicated one, and one that we ought to discuss. Having Arnold here, it makes it particularly pertinent because there's a big difference between a Jewish understanding of Messiah and a Christian understanding of Messiah. And Skona, I have no idea what your tradition is, but I do know Arnold is a Catholic deacon. So the rest of the folks I know very well here. So the English word Messiah is simply a translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, and there it is in Hebrew. The Hebrew word Mashiach, sorry?
No, sorry, talking to Dave. So.
Okay, the Hebrew word Mashiach simply means anointed. In biblical times, the kings of Israel were anointed by pouring holy oil on their heads. That was either done by a priest or a prophet sometimes. There are 39 references to the word Mashiach in the Hebrew Bible, and they all refer to real live, living kings in biblical times. Not one of those references is to a future redeemer.
Rabbi, does that mean that when we refer to the Messiah today as the Messiah will come and we'll all arise, that is totally rabbinic?
So what I would say is, and we can talk about this a little bit as I go through this, there are hints in the Bible of a future redemption. And then the rabbinic Judaism, which is the Judaism that's formed after the temple is destroyed, then starts to develop this concept much further, which is to say that in these future times when when God's name will be one and the world will worship the one God, that Israel will be reestablished as a nation. And of course, like any other nation, it will have a king. And of course, that king will be anointed and it will be Mashiach. And then as we'll see, there are different schools about what that means. What is the nature of the Messiah? Will it just be an ordinary, normal king, or will the king have sort of mystical powers? And there's disagreement on that. But I'm going to get there in a minute. When the Hebrew Bible is translated into Greek about 200 BCE, so this is before the Common Era, this is before the time of Jesus, it's a Jewish translation. Many Jews in this period of time, and Hellenism, in the aftermath of Alexander the Great, lots of Jews were speaking Greek. So they wanted a Greek translation, like most of us want an English translation of the Bible. So in the Greek translation, the Hebrew word Mashiach became the Greek word Christos. And there it is in Greek. And I always love to point out what looks like an X is actually the Greek letter chi. So when you see Xmas standing for Christmas, it's actually not that they don't want to say Christ or in Christmas. It's actually the Greek letter chi. The Greek word Christos for Messiah gives word to the English word Christ. So I speak a lot about Jesus, particularly in Christian groups, but I never refer to Jesus as Jesus Christ or as Christ, unless I'm trying to make a very specific theological point, such as Christians believe Jesus is the Christ. Okay.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Rabbi. Do you know where the Greek word Christos comes from? Let's see how to say this. So,
It's simply the word for anointed.
okay.
And it's a Jewish translation. So
Right.
so the translation is called the Septuagint into Greek. Okay. So the Jewish understanding of Messiah is someone who is fully human and only human. A political or military ruler like King David. King David, as most of us Jews know, we love King David. We sing David, Melech Yisrael, Chai, which means David, King of Israel, live forever. We love King David. After we read some of these stories, you're going to wonder why. But he is the prototypical military ruler. By the way, he's my favorite biblical character. He is not the Jewish understanding of Messiah is not God in any sense and not the Son of God in any sense beyond the idea that we are all children of God.
Is there a sense, Rabbi Michael, that he is chosen by God to be king?
That's a great question.
For example, Samuel, and then later David.
Yeah, so who chooses Samuel and who chooses David? I guess Nathan chooses Samuel, right?
It's from my understanding, it's through the prophets that God has spoken through the prophet to make this selection. Or
okay, and how would you deal with all the kings who turn out to be rotten? You think God chose them too?
Well, part of the thing, one of the Bibles, if I'm not mistaken about Samuel, is if I can't quote the verse exactly, but it said that God sent a spirit that turned him around, or he became
made him a little nuts.
Well, he was a lot nuts.
Yes. So I mean, the Bible actually, I don't know whether the Bible is explicit on the idea of whether God makes the choice. That raises a whole other larger question. Does God, direct the details of our life and of history? That is a much bigger subject, actually one I hope to address, but not in this class.
Okay.
Is God really in charge? Is God behind the coronavirus? I'm not going to discuss that one here. I'm going to try not to. So very importantly, particularly comparing Jewish understandings and Christian understandings, is nowhere in Jewish thought is the Messiah anywhere connected with redemption of sins. In Judaism, only we can atone for our sins. We understand that for sins against God, God is both just and merciful, and God forgives. But we teach in Judaism that for sins against another person, God cannot forgive the sinner unless the person offended forgives. So, Arnold, if you asked the question and I was to respond by saying, Arnold, that's a really stupid question. I thought you were smarter than that. That in Judaism would be a terrible sin. And we are taught that God cannot forgive that sin unless I ask for your forgiveness and you grant it first, then I can ask God's forgiveness. So that makes one sin definitionally in Judaism unforgivable. Can you figure out what that would be? There's a sin which...
And the dead person?
Murder.
exactly,
Murder
murder.
because the person can't.
Can't ask for forgiveness.
You can ask, but you're not going to get it. Yeah, so murder is definitionally unforgivable. But another difference in the world of understanding sin between Judaism and Christianity, and certainly Catholicism, is the idea that there's no such thing as a state of sin. A sin is a deed you've done, and now the question is, can you get it off your books? The understanding I like is the idea that we have lots of sins and good deeds, and there's a balance, and ultimately God is the judge, and we believe God is a merciful judge. So certainly, so again, more Jewish understandings of Messiah. There's a lot of different prophecies, or understood. Now this would be rabbinic understandings, starting with the Bible, but going into the world of the rabbis, that there would be a time of peace on earth, peace among people, even peace among animals, the lion lying down with the lamb. All the world will come to know the one God, but the details are unresolved. The mystics see this as a supernatural time with physical resurrection of the dead and battles of Gog and Magog and all kinds of strange things. The rationalists, like Maimonides, believe that there's going to be no physical changes in the world. And I like the rationalist idea that we will do the work to make the world perfect. Actually, Franz Kafka, who is neither a rabbi nor a theologian, coined the idea that once we do the work of making the world a much better, even perfect place, the Messiah will come to say Mazel Tov, that we've done a great job. And in Reform Judaism, we've gotten away from the idea of a individual Messiah and more a messianic age. And I would say if there's one issue in Reform Judaism that we really focus on, it's sometimes called Tikkun Olam, repair of the world, and making the world a better place. So, has the Messiah come? So here's Rabbi Lotker's handy dandy, you can do this yourself at home, has the Messiah come test. Read the Los Angeles Times cover to cover every day for a month. If there is no story of war, hatred, hunger, or, disease, the Messianic age may be here. But that doesn't seem to be true.
Well, it's not possible.
Well, Bayom Hahu Yehiyah Adonai Echad U'Shemo Echad. Maybe someday it might be possible. But until it is, from a Jewish point of view, the Messiah hasn't come.
Right.
So the simple thing is, why don't Jews accept Jesus as Messiah? No world peace, no Messiah. End of discussion. In Christianity, they also understand that there is no world peace. And none of these prophecies, I've said this enough times in front of Christian audiences, and I still have not yet been struck by lightning or by a priest or a minister. Jesus doesn't fulfill a single Jewish prophecy concerning the Messiah and the Messianic age. Those prophecies concerning peace on earth, goodwill toward men, lion lying down with the lamb, king restored on the throne of Israel, and so on, is in Christian thought the idea of a second coming. In Greek, the word is parnusa. It's not a Jewish idea. But the larger issue among Jews and Christians is not whether Jesus is the Messiah, but is whether Jesus is God. The idea of God taking human form, suffering with us, and dying for our sins is beautiful and inspiring. And by the way, that idea has really caught on. I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's something like, 2 billion or more Christians in the world, and there's about 16 million Jews. So this is an idea which has caught on. It's a beautiful idea. It's an inspiring idea, but it's not a Jewish idea. So this is why I have great respect for Christianity. I hope Arnold has felt that respect in our dealings, but less sympathy and respect for Jews for Jesus and Messianic Jews. Okay, so as I say here, the issue is not who is Jesus, but who is God. In the first century, people could argue and discuss whether Jesus was in fact the Messiah. that's not a subject for discussion among Jews anymore. It certainly is a discussion and a belief, an important belief among Christians. Any questions on this? This is a pretty important, although somewhat side issue. Okay, so now we get into the text. So I will have all the text for you on the screen. Arnold, you can keep me honest by checking in your Bible as we go along. So the first story is Lot, who is Abraham's nephew and his daughters. I think most of us know the basic story of Sodom and Gomorrah. After God engages Abraham to be God's partner, the covenant is going to flow through Abraham. God tells Abraham, hey, you know what? I'm going to destroy 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham starts arguing with God, which is pretty outrageous if you think of it. And Abraham negotiates with God. And Abraham says to God, suppose we find, I think 50 is where it starts, 50 righteous people in the city. Would you destroy those 50 righteous people along with the rest of the city? I propose that you save both cities if we find 50 righteous. God says, okay. And then 40, 30, 20, and 10. And they stops at 10. Abraham stops the argument at 10, which is one of the sources for the idea of 10 Jews praying together as a minyan. You need 10 Jews to form a quorum for prayer. But they can't even find 10 Jews. And so God decides to destroy the city. He is going to allow Lot and his unmarried, Lot and his wife and his daughters agree to flee. The wife looks back, is turned into a pillar of salt. And so Lot goes off and hides in a cave with his daughters. So let's see how we should do this. When we study in Torah study, it's kind of fun to have somebody else read it rather than listening to my voice all along. So this is Genesis 19. Anybody want to read?
I'll read.
Thank you.
Great.
Lot went up from Zohar and settled in the hill country with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zohar. And he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. And the older one said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we maintain life through our father. That night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day the older one said to the younger, see, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father. That night also they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus the 2 daughters of Lot came to be with child by their father. The older one bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. And the younger also bore a son, and she called him Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the Ammonites today.
Okay. Any questions about the story? Basically, the daughters believe the 3 of them are the only people left on earth. So the only way to preserve humanity is to have a child with their father. The other interesting. Say again.
That doesn't make sense. How then will the rest of humanity continue along? Because they had sons, but they're going to need more daughters.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that question. Actually, it's a little bit like the question we're studying right now in Torah study in the book of Genesis. Adam and Eve have 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and then it says Cain knew his wife. So the question is, where did she come from? And the real answer, there's Midrash, and I'm sure the Midrash are rabbinic stories to address questions like the one Len is asking. But the reality is the Bible is just not interested in that story. Maybe their plan was after they have these children, they would have more, and so on.
what I find out interesting about the language, though, is how, in a sense, how delicate it is. He knew not when they lie down and when they rose up. It does not talk about the act. Okay.
Yes, that's a very interesting point. And for the most part, we'll see that also in the book of Ruth, that biblical Hebrew is pretty delicate in its language. There are euphemisms. We're going to see them all. We're going to see it particularly in the book of Ruth. There are euphemisms about sexual activity and about genitalia, for that matter. But yes, I absolutely agree with you. And it also, I think it's trying to let Lot off the hook. You know, I don't know. There's the biological issue. If he's blind drunk, how did he actually accomplish this act? The Bible doesn't seem to be interested in that question either. But one thing which is kind of interesting and which you might miss if you don't know the Hebrew, Moav means literally from daddy. Isn't that a wonderful thing to name your your son? And Ben Ami means the son of my people. So we have a rather strange story, and probably the real reason for this story is the Israelites are going to have two enemy nations, the Ammonites and the Moabites. So we want to give their origins, you know, a distasteful element. You know, they were all the products of adultery. So, for example, in the book of Deuteronomy,
that's not adultery.
I'm sorry?
Incest.
Incest, right. Yeah, right. Yes, sorry, right, incest, absolutely. It's very important not to mix up incest and adultery. Len, you make sure I don't do that again, okay?
Well, Larry was right with us.
Oh, okay. In the book of Deuteronomy, in a bunch of laws, it says, no Ammonite. Why don't somebody read it? I'll do enough talking.
I'll read
No
it.
Ammonite or Moabite. No Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of their descendants, even in the 10th generation, shall ever be admitted into the congregation of the Lord, because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt, and because they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor of Aramaraim, to curse you. But the Lord your God refused to heed Balaam. Instead, the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, for the Lord your God loves you. You shall never concern yourselves with their welfare or benefit as long as you live.
Okay, any question about what we're supposed to do with these darn Ammonites or Moabites? They are never to be admitted into the congregation of the Lord, right? No question about that? Pretty firm? Wait till we get to the book of Ruth. So I'm going to keep track of the genealogy here. So you know Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham is the uncle of Lot, who with his daughters have Amnon and Moab. Okay? Okay, so now it's so much fun when I put these things together searching for images. So now we're going to have the story of Judah and Tamar. And so here's Judah and there's Tamar dressing up as a prostitute. Anyway, I won't give away the story. It's a really interesting story. So Judah, the reason we're Jews is because we're named after Judah. Judah is one of Jacob's 12 sons, right? So we're going to start reading the story of Judah and Tamar from Genesis 38.
About that time, Judah left his brothers and camped near a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. There, Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and cohabited with her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Er.
He named him Er, yeah.
Oh, sorry, he named him Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and named him Onan. Once again, she bore a son and named him Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him.
Okay, just to set the story, we're actually in the middle of the story of Joseph. Joseph has just been sold into slavery. He's gone off to Egypt. And now we have sort of an interruption in this story about Judah and his family. We don't know the name of his wife, but we know he has 3 sons. And now we're going to get a wife for his firstborn. So you, Beth, you can continue reading if you'd like.
Judah got a wife for Er, his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was displeasing to the Lord, and the Lord took his life.
So long, Er.
Then Judah said to Onan, join with your brother's wife and do your duty by her as a brother-in-law, and provide offspring for your brother. But Onan, knowing that the seed would not count as his, let it go to waste whenever he joined with his brother's wife, so as not to provide offspring for his brother. What he did was displeasing to the Lord, and he took his life also.
Let's stop for a second. It's important to explain what's going on. This actually is part of Torah law, which is explained later. And evidently it was part of common law of the time. So Tamar was married to Er, and Er died before they could have any children. So actually now the next brother in line, Onan, has an obligation to marry Tamar. And if they have a child, that child is considered to be the child of Er. Everybody with me?
Can I
This
ask
is
a
not
question?
sure.
If they had a daughter rather than a son, would that still be good enough, or are they waiting for a son?
Actually, I don't know the
If
answer
you
to
have
that
to marry
question.
the brother,
Yeah, I it's a question of inheritance laws, and I don't know how they would apply here. But if Onan is successful in having a child with Tamar, that child would get his older brother's inheritance. If he doesn't have a child with her, and she just goes back home, then he, as the second oldest son, will get the majority of the inheritance. I think typically they would get like half the inheritance, and all the other relatives would split off. So Onan did not want to have a child with her. So he practiced coitus interruptus. He would withdraw and spill his seed on the ground. This actually gives rise to the term onanism. I don't know if have any of you ever heard that?
Yeah.
It's a kind of an archaic term for masturbation. So this is, I'm so glad we don't have any children with us. This is actually the biblical proof text why masturbation is a sin, because spilling the seed on the ground is displeasing in God's eyes. But I think that's a misreading of the text. The simple meaning of the text is what God's upset about is he is not fulfilling his obligation to produce a child that will get Judah's inheritance. And we're actually going to see this story mirrored also in the book of Ruth. These stories are related a little bit later. So Onan's gone. Okay, now we got one son left. So why don't you continue, Beth, right here at verse 11.
Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought he too might die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house.
Okay, so Tamar has married brother number 1, he died. Brother number 2, he died. Judah is not anxious to see this trend continue. So he says, go back to your father's house, stay as a widow, although under the law, he was actually obligated to have her marry the youngest son. And sometime later, somebody want to pick up here?
I will. A long time afterward, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. When his period of mourning was over, Judah went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, together with his friend Hirah and the Adulamite. And Tamar was told, your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah for the sheep shearing.
Okay, sheep shearing may well be one of these euphemisms for sowing your wild oats, and you can, let's go shear some sheep. They are actually shearing sheep, but You can't shear sheep 24 hours a day, I am told. I've never actually shorn a sheep. Okay, so
So
go ahead.
So she took off her widow's garb, covered her face with a veil, and wrapping herself up, sat down at the entrance to Anamim, Anayim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him as a wife.
One of in every biblical story, there are themes that get repeated, and sometimes you only get them if you're reading in Hebrew or following along with the Hebrew. There's a lot of stories of dressing up and covering yourself. So, and the interesting thing here is the name Anayim means eyes. So there's seeing and not seeing. She is dressing up, and she's taking off her widow's garb, which is one form of dress. She's putting on basically as we'll see, she's dressing up like a harlot. Okay, let's continue.
When Judah saw her, he took her for a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, "Here, let me sleep with you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. "What," she asked, "will you pay for sleeping with me?" He replied, "I will send a kid from my flock." But she said, "You must leave a pledge until you have sent it." And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your seal and cord and the staff which you carry." So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she conceived by him. Then she went on her way. She took off her veil and again put on her widow's garb.
The Hebrew for sleep is probably lay with her. You know, I don't have my Hebrew. I can get a Hebrew text pretty quickly. So we have a transaction. He sees a prostitute and he knows what he wants. She names the price. He left his Canaanite express card home, so he doesn't have any cash. So she wants some security to secure the payment, and she asks for something pretty powerful: his seal and his cord. His seal is in effect his signature. And again, later on in the Joseph story, Joseph gets Pharaoh's seal. I mean, there's things going on. Joseph gets dressed up in a many colored coat. There's all kinds of wonderful connections going on. So basically, he lays with her, and then she takes off her veil and she goes back to live with her father. She puts on her widow's clothing. Okay.
It's interesting that all these people that have illicit sex, they conceive after one incident of sex. You know,
Yes,
Lot's daughters. Yeah, we've got Sarah and Rebecca and Hannah, you know, happily married, not able to conceive.
Son of a gun. That's the theological term. Yeah, so again, this would be picking up on, one of the themes Arnold raised before, and that is God is really in charge here. And so this, definitely goes with the idea that God has a plan.
Because they're in-laws, it's not an incestuous relationship?
It's his daughter-in-law.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Having sex with your daughter-in-law is one of those
Yeah.
Yes.
Just like father's wife.
Yes. So so we had Lot and his daughter.
The moms.
And exactly. That's why the name of this is Mamzers and Mashiach. And we're going to see the connection in a little while. Okay, moving right along. Somebody else want to read?
I can't. It's very small.
That's small.
Okay, if nobody else wants to read, I'll read a little bit.
I'll read.
Okay, go ahead.
No, he needs my phone. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Well, that's
Judah sent the kid by his friend the pledge from the woman. Could not find her. He inquired of the people of that town, "Where is the cult prostitute, the one at Enayim by the road?" They said, "There has been no prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I could not find her." Moreover, the townspeople said, "There has been no prostitute here." Judah said, "Let her keep them, lest we become a laughingstock. I did send her this kid, but you did not find her."
Yeah,
About
the one
two-
interesting thing here is cult prostitute. The Hebrew actually, the word is kadesha, which has the word kodesh and holy. In certain pagan religions, prostitution was part of worship, or I should say, copulation was part of worship. Sadly, that part has been filtered out as we.
Mike,
Yes.
Rabbi Mike,
Yes.
here there's a asterisk and it says a Hebrew tomb Kadesha, literally consecrated woman,
Yes. So
designates a woman associated with the sanctuary whose
yes.
activities would include prostitution.
Give me that
it
old
talks about-
time religion. Sorry?
I don't know.
Yeah. So Kadesha, the Jews here will recognize the word Kodesh, Kaddish, Kiddush, which means holy, and the ah on the end makes it feminine. So your description is exactly right. Are you reading from notes in a Catholic text?
Yes, it's
Okay.
a note there.
Right. So the reason for that is he didn't want to admit that he had sex with a common, ordinary prostitute. So he was kind of toning down the language, assuming that she was, I don't know, maybe cult prostitute working her night job or something. It's a difference between saying where's the whore I slept
She's
with
really
and
a
where's
nice
the
girl.
escort.
No.
Sorry?
It's like saying she really was a nice girl.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So he sends, the kid for payment. They can't find her because she's obviously she's taken off her harlot's clothing, and so he says, "All right, let her keep the the cord and the staff and so on."
So-
Okay. Here
it compares that word with zona.
Yes. So zona is another Hebrew word for prostitute. My sense of the word zona is a good old-fashioned prostitute with
Okay.
no holy connection at all.
Okay.
Okay. In other books, Arnold, I think it's Amos. I can't remember which
Well,
one.
they mentioned others. I think it was Deuteronomy, Hosea. The same Hebrew word is used.
Yes.
In 38, 15, and 24, the common word for prostitute, zona, is used.
Yes.
Versus a consecrated woman.
That's where we
Okay.
get the term red zona. I don't know if you know that. I'm just kidding. Okay.
Isn't that in
months-
Amsterdam?
Yes, exactly. 3 months later.
Oh, wait, I got to give him back the phone. Here you go.
3 months later,
Either different phone or
Judah
your
was told-
glasses.
3 months
Here,
later,
I've got it.
can you hear me? Well, go ahead. 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has played the harlot. In fact, she is with child by harlotry. Bring her out, said Judah, and let her be burned.
Punishment.
As she was brought out, she sent this message to her father-in-law. I am with child by the man to whom these belong. And she added, examine these. Whose seal and cord and staff are these? Judah recognized them, and she is more in the right than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he was not intimate with her again.
Okay, so the only good thing you can say about Judah, and he does this a couple of times, is when he's wrong, he admits it. I think that's not necessarily true of all leaders, but I'm not sure. I'll have to do my homework. But again, the Hebrew is interesting. He says,
Not our present leader.
he says, examine them. The Hebrew phrase is hakerna. And these are exactly the same phrase. I don't know if it's Judah, but they used actually was the chapter before this when they presented Joseph's bloody coat. Supposedly Joseph was killed by a wrestling match with a goat, and they brought the evidence of his death as a bloody coat. And I think Judah says to his father, examine these, hakerna. So he's getting the same words in effect thrown back in his face. He recognizes that she has done the right thing, and he was wrong not to give her to Shelah, and they didn't continue the relationship. Okay, and this time, not only is she pregnant, she's going to have twins. So somebody want to read at verse 27?
Somebody else.
When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife tied a crimson thread on that hand to signify this one came out first. But just then he drew back his hand, and out came his brother, and she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." So he was named Perez. Afterwards, his brother came out, on whose hand was the crimson thread, and he was named Zerah.
So there are 2 children, and those children are going to be important. Here, back to the genealogy. So we have Judah and Tamar, and Judah's daughter-in-law, and there's going to be the son Perez, and Perez is going to be an important member of the genealogy, so we're going to keep an eye on that. Okay, and then I'll just go back. Whoops. So there they are. There she is by the side of the road, and that's, of course, the name of that book, The Harlot by the Side of the Road. Judah saying, "Let her be burned alive." This is Lego Judah, and she was right and I was wrong. Once he sees this, the seal and the staff. Okay, I just want you to keep in mind what we said about the Moabites. Everybody remember? No Moabites. If you see a Moabite in the street, don't marry him or her. Everybody got that? Mm-hmm. Book of Ruth, book we traditionally read at Shavuot. So there's Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, Boaz, winnowing grain, and she gets a lot of grain and she's really happy. We'll come back and take some of these pictures. Ruth is lying down at Boaz's legs. We're going to see the legs is a biblical euphemism for genitalia, and they have a baby, Mazel Tov. Okay, so somebody want to read we're going to actually read, and we'll probably get through it tonight, the entire book of Ruth.
In the days
very short book, sorry.
In the days when the chieftains ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. And his 2 sons were named Mahalan and Chilion, Ephraimites of Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there.
I've underlined all the mentions of Moab, just to make it clear how often this is going to come up. By the way, I can't remember the exact meaning of Malon and Chilon, but it's like, death and disaster. They're terrible names. They are living in a land called Bethlehem. Have you ever heard of that one, Arnold?
What, the land of bread?
Yes. So Beit Lechem means house of bread in Hebrew. I was there about 1.5 years ago. And of course, it's now in the Palestinian territories. And I learned to my amazement, lechem in Arabic means meat. It means bread in Hebrew and meat in Arabic. The significance of that is, for this story, is 0. Okay, let's continue.
Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Oprah and the other Ruth.
Wait a minute, they married Moabite women?
Yeah.
Son of a gun. Okay. Wonder how that's going to turn out.
And then they lived there about 10 years. Then those 2, Mahalan and Chilion, also died. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband.
And I'll just note for Skona's sake that they didn't have any children. So not everybody gets pregnant in these stories.
Only people who do it only once.
Yeah. Okay. Next verse.
She started out with her daughters-in-law to return to the country of Moab. For in the country of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. Accompanied by her 2 two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah.
Okay, so again, you see Moab mentioned a lot of times. It says in the time of chieftains, this is actually the time of the judges. So actually in the Catholic Bible, this is, I think this follows the book of Judges. In the Jewish Bible, it's in a different place.
It
And
does follow.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
It does follow Judges. And
Yes.
It does say Judges here.
Yes. And the rabbis don't think very much of Elimelech, because when the going got tough, he went to Moab. So there was a famine, things were bad. He picked up and left looking for better places. And of course, he dies and his sons die. So you have the widow Ruth with her two daughters-in-law, and they're going back to Bethlehem in Judah. Okay, anybody can continue reading.
But Naomi said, go ahead. Be glad.
But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house."
Stop for a second. In Jewish tradition, this story of Ruth is the prototype for conversion in the Bible. Conversion to Judaism is not mentioned in the Bible, because being Jewish, being an Israelite, means you're part of the tribe, and you can marry into the tribe, but there's no mention of any sort of formal conversion. But the rabbis of the Talmud are going to look back to this story as a model, at least to model after. So one of the things you may have heard, if somebody converts to Judaism, traditionally we are to discourage them 3 times, and that's based on this story. And we'll see Naomi discourages her daughters-in-law, and particularly Ruth, 3 times. So may the Lord deal kindly with you right here.
May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband. And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people."
Okay, this is, by the way, the only story, the book of Ruth is the only story of a nice relationship, the only story in the Bible, maybe even in literature of this time, of a nice relationship between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. Let's continue, verse 11.
But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you on their account debar yourself from marriage? Oh no, my daughters. My lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me."
Okay, so this is pretty extreme. She's again discouraging them a second time, and you know, she was saying, even if I were pregnant, are you going to wait around for you know, my other children to be born to marry them? He's saying, no, go home, go back to Moab, go back to the house of your father, I think he said, or maybe back to your house of your mother. Yeah, interesting. Okay, next section.
They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell. But Ruth clung to her, so she said, "See, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law." But
So
Ruth
that's
replied,
sort of rejection number 3.
But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem.
So I think you will recognize this phrase, and when we have someone convert, we often have them read this, and it's you know, it's very powerful. Where it has to do with travel, where you go, I will go, place that you live, peoplehood, and your God. And then also, where you die, I will die and be buried. So you can't have a more powerful statement
Beautiful.
of attachment.
Now-
It's quite beautiful.
Now, why do they use this phrase a lot of times in rings for husbands and wives? Isn't that the same phraseology?
You're not referring to Anila Dodi Vidodi Lee.
Yeah.
No, that's
It's
not from this
very
book.
similar.
No. Well, it's somewhat similar. Anila Dodi Vidodi Lee is from the Song of Songs. And it means, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. So they're both powerful statements of love, but they're...
And that's my question, Rabbi Mike, because
Yeah.
in the column written here, it's not quite written like that Bible. The way it is phrased, it looks like it was once a psalm or a song or something like that.
You're talking about the
way
print?
it's printed in my book, yes.
Yeah. So I'll just point out, the printer of your book decided this was poetic. And so the printer, the publisher, decided to print it in that way. I mean, this would have been a scroll. In fact, there are 5 scrolls in the Bible. They're called Megillot. This is Megillot Esther, not Megillot Esther, Megillat Ruth. And it would not be written like that, in a scroll. But or maybe it would be, but the idea is that it's poetic language, and so they've just decided calligraphically to write it that way.
Okay, because generally when I see something like that in the Bible, I think it is either taken from a psalm or some other. It had some other place before, like a ritual song or something like that. That's a carryover. And it's brought out of the text that way.
No, there's a bunch of things that are written that way. The most notable is, and you do see it in Torah scrolls, is the Song of the Sea in Exodus, when the sea parts and the Israelites go through, and then Miriam and the women sing. There is actual calligraphy, which it's a very traditional way of writing the text, and it's supposed to look like bricks, because the waters formed walls and look like bricks. So there's a lot of calligraphy in a written Torah scroll. I would just say the publisher here is deciding this is poetic material, but I don't believe it's taken from any psalm. In fact, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so moving right along.
When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" "Do not call me Naomi," she replied. Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me?
Okay, so let me just point out, Mara, the root for Mara is mar, like maror that we have on Passover, bitter herbs. The word mar means bitter. Naim means pleasant. The traditional greeting in Israel is Naim Ma'od. It's very nice to meet you. So that's just a little bit. The other thing which is kind of interesting is God is called Shaddai, which can mean mountain or breasts, which is interesting. But typically it's one of the names for God, usually translated as the Almighty or All-Powerful. Arnold, I'm sort of interested as to what your translation is. And
our translation has Almighty.
Almighty, yeah. So that's here they're using the Hebrew. Okay, and
thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth, the Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest.
Okay, so we're going to see how many times, for those of us with poor memory, the text is going to remind us that Ruth is a Moabite. Okay, chapter 2 of the book of Ruth. I'll read a little bit. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, I would like to go in the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. Yes, daughter, go, she replied, and off she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, it was the piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family. In the Torah, it says when you're harvesting, you don't pluck every last bit of grain, but you leave some for the poor. You also don't trim the corners of the field. That grain belongs to the poor. So typically when harvesters would be going, presumably with, scythes or whatever they use to harvest the grain, women, presumably, I guess men can be gleaners too, would follow them and pick up the spare.
Rabbi,
yes.
When you're done with that, finish your explanation.
Yeah. So she just happened to wind up in one of her relatives' family, and she doesn't know that he's a relative.
The question I have here is the reference to her as daughter. Is that usual in the Bible that a daughter-in-law is referred to as daughter?
Yeah, I don't think it's unusual.
Okay.
Okay. Presently, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. So the boss has come to town. He greeted the reapers. The Lord be with you. And they responded, the Lord bless you. So he is seemingly a pious, nice guy. Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reaper, whose girl is that? Not exactly PC. The servant in charge of the reaper said, she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since morning. She has rested but little in the hut. When he says, whose girl is that? Women really had no independent status. You were either somebody's wife or somebody's daughter. So that's what he's asking. Boaz said to Ruth, listen to me, my daughter. So this again is a similar expression. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere, but stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field that they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn. She prostrated herself with her face on the ground and said to him, why are you so kind to single me out when I am a foreigner? Boaz said in reply, I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. May the Lord, now when you see Lord here, they're using the Yud He Vav He, the actual name of God. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. She answered, you are most kind, my Lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant, though I am not so much as one of your maidservants. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here and partake of the meal and dip your morsel into the vinegar. So she sat down beside the reapers. He handed her roasted grain, and she ate her fill and even had some left over. Anybody want to read?
Sure.
Thank you.
When she got up again to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers. You are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you must also pull some stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean and not scold her. She gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned. It was the ephah of barley.
Ephah is a unit of measure, volume.
And carried it back with her to town. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and when she also took out and gave her what she had left over after eating her fill, her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law whom she had worked with, saying, the name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who has not failed in his kindness to the living or to the dead. For, Naomi explained to her daughter-in-law, the man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen. Ruth the Moabite said, he even told me, Stay close by my workers until all my harvest is finished. And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law Ruth, it is best, daughter, that you go out with his girls and not be annoyed in some other field. So she stayed close to the maidservants of Boaz and gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. Then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law.
And I copied the note here. It says, according to Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the fact that Boaz was a kinsman of Ruth's dead husband opened the possibility of providing an heir for Ruth's dead husband. So Boaz becomes somehow in the line, it's not 100% clear, of this idea that if he has a child with Ruth, that this child would represent her dead husband's inheritance. Okay, chapter 3. Anybody want to take a shot?
One question.
Yes.
Rabbi Mike, Redeemer is here listed as Goel.
Yeah, that's a Hebrew word for redeemer. It wouldn't be, a different word would be used in the kind of redemption associated with Hosea or Yeshua, where the Hebrew word for Jesus is a different root. Goalenu is again someone, is another word for redeemer, but I would say more like redeeming a pledge or redeeming property.
Somebody paid a ransom or something. Now, yeah. But the only reason I was asking is because the L, I mean, like the L. Samuel.
No, I don't think it's related to God's name there. I think the L in there is actually part of the word.
Okay.
I really should have the Hebrew.
Rabbi,
yes.
What inheritance? I mean, Elimelech died a while ago. His two sons died. Where is this inheritance?
That's a great question. I don't know that I've ever thought about that question. Yeah, he may not have much. Well, as we're going to see later, he may have some fields and things. I think there's a hint of this later in the book, but it doesn't seem like Naomi can take advantage of them because she sends her daughter an amount to poor people's work. So it's a great question. On one level, it's carrying sort of the family name forward. On another level, it's I think there is some property that we're going to see later.
The explanation further,
yeah.
Rabbi Mike talks about involved are the recovery or retention of family land, as in Leviticus 25, Jeremiah. It involves the release of a relative from voluntary servitude to pay debt, again from Leviticus, and redeeming blood or vengeance attested in passages which regulate such vengeance.
Okay, you're talking about the definition of the word goel.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think Boaz owns some land, Larry, and
oh no, I understand that Boaz, but
I'm sorry, not Boaz.
I
think Elimelech has some land. Yeah, I misspoke. I think it's going to turn out that Elimelech does have some property. Apparently, it's not earning any income or being planted when they first come to town. So that's about as good an answer as I can give you, but it's a very interesting question.
I thought you were going to tell me that only God knows. So.
No. God may know, but I'm speculating on what I might know. Okay, so chapter 3.
Okay. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley in the threshing floor tonight.
Now, everybody know what winnowing is? You've got the grain, I guess you crush it, and you throw it up in a sieve, and I don't know whether the grain goes through or it doesn't go through. I haven't winnowed barley in about 15 generations.
The light stuff away.
Okay, and the light stuff is the husks, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a lot of work. They're going to be on the threshing floor, and they're going to be winnowing barley all night.
So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you ought to do. She replied, I will do everything you tell me.
Okay, so go and uncover his feet, which may be a euphemism for uncovering more than his feet, and lie down there, and he'll tell you what you're going to do. Verse 5, and she's very agreeable. Lenny?
He went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood went to lie down beside the grain pile. Then she went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at his feet.
At some moments, you know, like in the old commercials, are just priceless. You lie down with a bunch of guys and a bunch of grain, and then there's a woman lying at your feet or whatever.
Who are you? He asked. And she replied, I am your handmaid Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman.
Now, spreading your robe can mean, you know, offer me the protection of your house and estate, or it could possibly mean spread your robe over me. You know, as Freud once said, sometimes a cigar is a cigar. And so now she's informing him that he's a kinsman and has the possibility, even the obligation, to marry her. Okay, moving right along. Somebody else, or Len?
He exclaimed, "Be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to younger men, rather poor or rich."
The rabbis
And
of the
now-
Midrash say that Boaz was 80 years old at this point in time.
Oh, boy. "And now, daughter, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true, I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. Stay for the night, and then in the morning, if he will act as a redeemer, good. Let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as a redeemer for you, I will do so myself, as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning." So she lay at his feet until dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor.
So
And
again,
he
this
said-
gives a hint of it being a little suspicious.
And he said, "Hold out your shawl you are wearing." She held it while he measured out 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her back. When she got back down to the town, she came to her mother-in-law, who asked, "How is it with you, daughter?" She told her all that the man had done for her, and she added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, 'Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" And Naomi said, "Stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matters turn out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
Okay, and chapter 4, which I think is the last chapter. We're going to finish the story and keep you all in suspense until next week. I will pick it up. Meanwhile, Boaz had gone to the gate and sat down there. And now the Redeemer, whom Boaz had... Oh, by the way, the other Redeemer is possibly a closer relative. That's what's going on here. Who Boaz had mentioned passed by. He called, come over and sit down here, so-and-so. So-and-so is a really interesting one. The Hebrew for that is, I don't know if it's Ploni Almoni or Ploni, but the word Ploni in Hebrew is equivalent to John Doe. It's like in a document, if I'm reading a document, you know, do you, Ploni, take you, Plonit, to be your wife? So this Redeemer, this other guy, is so irrelevant that the text not only doesn't name him, but names him John Doe. You know, we don't even care what his name is. So he called, "Come over and sit here, so-and-so." So he came over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, "Be seated here," and they sat down. So you need 10 people to sort of form witnesses for this legal proceeding. He said to the Redeemer, Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to her kinsman, Elimelech. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem it, tell me that I may know. For there is no one to redeem it but you, and I come after you. I am willing to redeem it, he replied. Boaz continued, when you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate. The Redeemer replied, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. You take over my right of redemption, for I am unable to exercise this. The transaction is a little bit complicated. He wants to get the land, but when he realizes he also has to get the woman, and his next child with her will
Inherit his stuff.
will not inherit, will inherit the land rather than his other children. The estate is kind of clouded. There's a cloud on the title. And I have to admit, this is not entirely clear to me. Now, this was formerly done in Israel in the cases of redemption or exchange to validate any transaction. One man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. Such was the practice in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, acquire it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and the rest of the people, you are witnesses today that I am acquiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilon and Malon. I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, wife of Malon, as my wife, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown. You are my witnesses today. Very formal, very official.
But that's not permitted. She's a Moabite.
Oh, you think? We're going to, let's see if, I don't know. So we'll see where this Moabitess winds up and who her offspring is. All the people of the gate and the elders answered, we're witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel, prosper in Ephratah, and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Remember Judah and Tamar? Through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz married Ruth, Mazel Tov. She became his wife, and he cohabited with her. The Lord let her conceive. So again, God's involved in all of this. And she bore a son. And the woman said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the child and held it to her bosom. She became its foster mother, and the woman neighbors gave him a name, saying, a son is born to Naomi. They named him Obed, for he was the father of Jesse, father of David. This is the line of Perez. Remember, Perez is Judah's son with Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Aminadab, Aminadab begot Nachshon, Nachshon begot Salmon, Salmon begot Boaz, Boaz begot Obed, Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. What is really interesting here, well, what's interesting here? Let me ask. I'll tell you what I think is interesting, but you don't have to guess it. What do you find it?
The fact that he married someone who was a Moabite, who was not Moabitess, and yet who does she wind up as her grandchild? David.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's his great grandchild, but but we'll count generations. But yes, so David is the offspring of a Moabite,
and
who was
and
never
the
to be
other side
admitted.
is the offspring of Perez. I mean, he's from that illegal,
Right,
illicit.
right. Exactly.
different illicit.
Perez is a mamzer, having been born of Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar, but that's okay. That's on his father's side, but on his mother's, because that's going to lead
Obed
to
is on-
Boaz. But on his mother's side, they're all mamzers because they are descendant from Moab, who is the product of Lot and his daughter. Just one big happy family. So we will close by just taking a glance at this genealogy. Remember, we had Perez down here, the son of Ruth, the son of, Tamar and Judah. 4 generations. We have Salmon and Rahab. We're not going to discuss this story, but in Matthew, Rahab is identified as a harlot, also mentioned in the book of Joshua. They wind up having Boaz. Boaz marries Ruth, a Moabitess, and then we have 1, 2, 3 generations, and we get down to David.
Isn't there a good girl amongst all of them?
What's wrong with these girls?
That's good. I have
There's
2
not one
questions.
good girl.
Can
Yes, yeah. So this is we will discuss, and then tune in next week for the exciting, dare I say, climax to the story. Yes.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Sure.
They're brief. I'm thinking when they say no Moabite, that meant no male Moabite.
Have you been reading this, or is that actually drawn from your legal brain?
It's drawn from my feminist brain.
Even better.
And my second question is, you mentioned your website. Can you just say what it is or how to get
It's just Lotker, LOTKER.com.
Oh, that's easy. Thank you.
Yes. So that's the way the rabbis are going to get David off the hook here, because it says in Hebrew, in English, Moabite could refer to male or female, but Hebrew is a gendered language, so you have Moabi and Moabiyah. That's what the rabbis say. It didn't say that no Moabitess couldn't enter the land, because one of the problems, and this is not the biggest problem that David has, but one of the problems, I'm going to stop sharing. One of the problems that the rabbis have is, how do we get David off the hook? I mean, we're going to see next week he's a murderer, he's an adulterer, and those are his best qualities. No, but he's also the great-grandchild of a Moabitess. So the rabbis have to come up with some legal mechanism to get David off the hook for all of these things. And I am proud and impressed with your legal and feminist insight, because I would have never guessed that in a million years. But that, in fact, is the way they get David off the hook for marrying a Moabitess. We never said Moabitess, the rabbis would say. So I certainly hope you will join me next week as we finish the exciting conclusion of the story. And believe me, it only gets better. You can read ahead the story of David and Bathsheba, and it's wonderful. So I'm going to stop the recording.